So we move on now to Curley's wife in section 5. This is obviously where she dies. It's quite sad. Again, a lot of people have their own kind of ideas on Curley's wife, and they're generally negative, but I think this one kind of paints her slightly differently, but obviously take from it what you will. So when we first see her, she creeps up on Lenny, and she's wearing a bright cotton dress, and she's obviously dressed up to look good. And again, you could say that highlights her tardiness, or highlights her need for attention, or highlights a kind of social image that she's trying to play, depending on which way, trying to live up to, depending on which way you're trying to write about her. When she says, we realise again her loneliness, and again, the situation she's in, being the only woman on the ranch, and obviously that she's nameless. And she says, why can't I talk to you? I never get to talk to anybody. I get awful lonely. And the idea about the awful lonely there could be an indication of why she actually dresses and does the things she does, because that's the only way she knows how to get attention. We actually given a bit of insight into that a little later on when we come to the actors, etc., and what happened. And obviously what he said to her, and that could have been a huge influence on her, but we'll come to that. When Lenny reinstates that he's not allowed to talk to her, she gets angry. So again, that's kind of like, she doesn't understand why people are like this with her. So maybe she doesn't understand the connotations in her dressing that way and being a certain way around men, which is going to get everyone else into trouble. She doesn't see it, and perhaps that's why here she gets angry. What's the matter with me? It's no longer just like, why does anyone want to talk to me? It's like, what's wrong with me? As if she was some kind of diseased creature, or some kind of leper on this. And in some ways she is. She totally is, in that she's a woman there, a married woman there, that obviously no one really wants to have anything to do with, because this isn't a woman's world. And then she says, I could have made something of myself. She's only like, I think 19 or something, or she's young anyway, and she's got this real bitterness here. I could have made something of myself. Even she feels maybe in some sense that she should have fulfilled something, and she says, maybe I will yet. And this is what we get the idea that she's got her own dreams. And then in talking that's just before she starts talking about the people she met and the promises that were made to her, etc. And it's really interesting that she said that the description that follows, and then her words tumbled out in a passion of communication. Maybe this is finally the first time she's breaking out and letting all these things out, as though she hurried before her listener could be taken away. So that shows the desperation of her need to communicate and kind of try and get things out. There's not really much there's so much that she feels in and of herself. There's so much she's actually feeling within and of herself, that she's kind of bottled up, and it all comes out. So every time we've seen her with the kind of facade, and she's actually come into places, saying, where's Curly, and trying to get the guy's attention. But in this section you can read exactly why she approaches things like that, or at least reasons to argue, and obviously the depth of her loneliness and sadness here. And we've got that little quotation as well, that now the light was lifting and the sun went down. Again, it's kind of like on her life perhaps, or on her hopes, on her dreams, and on Lenny's as well, as just mentioned in one of the last videos. And obviously with the sun going, obviously then the essence of life goes as well, and just kind of telling it's some you can read it as if it's foreshadowing her death. She tells us about she met one of the actors, and he says, I could go with the show, but my old lady wouldn't let me. And so here we get the idea of her crush dreams, things she didn't actually get to do, and her hoping that hopefully one day something will happen. And also that she met a guy, he says, we're going to put me in the movie, says I was a natural. Now us looking at that, we look at the part says as natural, and we can see that it's probably just a line, a throwaway, perhaps to try and get her to sleep with him or something of that line, even though we've got no evidence for that. But we can just imagine it's some kind of chat up. Obviously stereotypically that's a cliche, that someone was going to put you in the movies and says that you're a natural for the movies. So yeah, we get the idea of that attention, or that reason she wants attention, could be stemming from this, from people saying that they're going to put her in a show and put her in films. So maybe she's got a great association, or a really damaging association, with the way that she looks in terms of how she wants to be seen by people, and therefore she thinks that's the only thing that people actually see in her. So when she actually starts, and then it makes more sense as why she actually gets all her words out really quickly here, because these are actual emotions and feelings, or a history. She's trying to tell someone something more than just physically, than the way she looks. She's actually trying to connect with someone here. Unfortunately, she picks the wrong person to try and connect with. So obviously, just in case I haven't mentioned it, that was obviously her dream, which is faded into nothing. And then again, we realise how much she's confiding in Lenny, etc. She said, I ain't told nobody this, and she goes, maybe I shouldn't. I don't like Curly. He ain't a nice fella. She tells us what we already know, but the fact that she knows as well kind of shows as well, why she's avoiding him, why she's never around when he is, why she tries to get other people's attention, etc., etc., etc. So it's kind of coupled with the idea of what he says earlier. All he says is how he's gonna be. Every time any conversation that they have, she says it's just about, oh yeah, well, I'm going to get this guy and I'm going to give him a right, I'm going to punch him here, punch him there. So obviously, it's not completely something that she'd actually want to be involved with, and we can only imagine the other kind of ill traits that he has. She takes Lenny's hands and puts it on her head, unknowingly. She again maybe kind of taunting, or maybe it's kind of a payment for Lenny in some way, and kind of like listening to Lenny. So she's kind of letting him do this, or again, she just flirts. So it naturally now she doesn't know how to stop, and then she kind of invites him to do this, and then obviously he ends up killing her, and she flops around like a fish. It's interesting that straight afterwards a dog comes in, and when after Lenny's left, and the dog comes in, and the dead scent of Curly's wife, and the hair arose, and the hair arose along her spine, and then she whimpered and cringed. And obviously we've got this pathetic fallacy, the idea here that what's going on, actually no, sorry, not pathetic fallacy, just the animalistic reference in that the dog realizes he's sad, and the dog whimpers and cringes. The dog is actually saddened by what happened, but no one else who actually comes in is saddened by what's happened. So we've got the animals there showing us how the behavior should have been, and then we just got the humans coming in thinking about their lost dreams. And so for example, for Curly and George it's a lost dream, and for Candy it's just a chance of revenge, etc., etc. So it's quite sad that only the animal shows us the feelings that we should have here in its whimpering and cringing. And then we've got this kind of one of the last things that actually is said about her. And the meanness and the plannings and the discontent and the ache for attention were all gone from her face, and she was very pretty and simple, and her face was sweet and young. And I just think that's just a really excellent summary of all the thing that comes from, she's mean because of the way she has to do it, and she's got all this kind of the things that she plans, and all the ideas of the discontent that she feels, unhappy with her life, and that ache for attention, all this negativity. Suddenly, she's free of all that. And maybe in a way Steinbeck's saying, that this is better off for her because it's not a place for a woman in one sense. Or maybe he's also saying that it's if she'd have just been more of herself, then she would have been happier. You can take either from that. And she was very pretty and simple, and her face was sweet and young, and that's the nicest thing that's actually come across about anything. And it only comes in her death, and obviously everyone else kind of coming around, it doesn't say that. So it's really important that the narrator offers us that, so we can actually see her for who she is, rather than just what the people on the ranch see her as. And then we've got the moment just after that, and as happens sometimes, a moment settled and hovered and remained for much more than a moment, and the sound stopped and the movement stopped for much more than a moment. Movement stops for much more than a moment. And what we kind of take from that is, that's her, that's the prayer for her. That's the space where, someone should have said something, or something should have been done positive, etc., etc. Right there, that's her moment. And it's also important because that's the moment that everything changes. There's no one on the ranch that isn't affected by that moment right there. Obviously Lenny and George massively, Candy massively, Curly massively in theory, etc. But even Slim and Carlson, etc., they're all affected by it because they know that things are going to change with regards to, the boss. There's going to be an inquisition, there's going to be police coming down, there's going to be this. So obviously there's a huge moment on the life of the ranch. And obviously it's a change as well, just in their kind of day-to-day thing. Curly can't come after them, asking where his wife is anymore. So it's a huge change, and it's kind of allowed to breathe there. That moment in the passing of Curly's wife, we get to mourn her, and then at the same time really take stock of the fact that everything's different after this point.